So the subject of today's webinar is Unpacking Drupal 11, the future of digital experiences, and paving the launchpad for the Drupal Starshot in January of 2025. So we'll be talking about Drupal 11's recent release, some of the banner and highlight features that we really want to share with y'all, and then giving you an update and a little bit of an introduction, if you haven't heard about it, to the Drupal Starshot initiative and the progress that's been made so far. My name is Tim Lennon. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Drupal Association, which is the nonprofit organization in the United States that supports the global Drupal community with the help of members and sponsor organizations. And I'm joined by Dries. Dries, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Dries. I guess two parts to my story. One, I started the Drupal project and I'm the project lead for Drupal. I've been doing that for like 24 years, a very long time. But then also co-founded Acquia, and I'm the Chief Technology and Chief Strategy Officer at Acquia.
Awesome. Thanks, Dries. Good to be back with you again, and excited for the conversation today. So our agenda. We'll do an introduction to Drupal 11 and to Drupal in general, because we know there are some attendees who may not be familiar with Drupal at all yet. We'll talk about the major updates, some of the key features. There's a lot that goes into every major version of Drupal, but we'll highlight some of the most important things. That include some enhancements to the content authoring experience and some security and compliance enhancements. Then we'll talk about this Drupal Starshot initiative you may have heard of to make an incredible new version of Drupal that wraps together Drupal core and some of the best modules of the Contribute ecosystem and makes it all easy to use for anyone. And then we'll take the Q&A questions.
Super duper.
Yeah, so to dive right in, Dries, can you tell us a little bit about Drupal in general and then Drupal 11 specifically?
Well, yeah, sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, I started Drupal a long time ago. If you don't know what Drupal is, you might not be on the right webinar, but you're still very welcome, because we're going to get going and talk about some of Drupal's kind of gritty details. But Drupal was essentially started in 2001, and it was born as a content management system, so software to build websites. That's really what Drupal is. And in 2001, I think a lot of people may not recall, but it was early days of the web. It was before Safari, before Firefox, before YouTube. I remember Google being a small private company, not a public company, as an example. Mobile web didn't exist. Well, in fact, we didn't have mobile phones. I mean, we had cell phones, and I remember being one of the first people with a cell phone back then. And I think I could send, like, I don't know, 30 text messages a month. So there was definitely no mobile internet, no mobile browsers. It was good old text messaging with limits. And so, yeah, before mobile, really smartphones, I should say, and iPads, all of these things. And obviously, social media didn't exist either. All of these things came after. And, Drupal has been around ever since, and we've continuously reinvented ourselves and adjusted to the times, I would say. And obviously we continue to be one of the largest CMSs in the world today. So we've seen a lot of different things over the years, and we continue to innovate, which is, we'll talk about that later in this webinar, what we're currently working on. So,
awesome.
So today in the enterprise, 1 in 8 websites run on Drupal. I would say probably 1 in 30 websites if you look beyond just the enterprise and include everything, which is an incredible number. If you think about 1 in 8 enterprise websites, what that really means is that everyone that's on the web and visits, more than, let's say, 20 pages, will statistically kind of hit a Drupal site, which is pretty special to think about. And so all of the people that contribute to Drupal and make Drupal better, it's kind of nice to know that your changes basically impact so many different sites and ultimately so many different, web users. Drupal is great at many things. Obviously we were kind of born as a low-code, no-code tool, like from day one. A big part of what we did is enabling people to build websites, assemble websites. That's a word that we use a lot, or at least used to use a lot. WebAssembly, assembling websites. Today, often people talk about composable websites, but we've really been, a website platform for many, many years. Um, we're also one of the most scalable, I would say, and robust websites platforms in the world, where we just hosted a website for the Olympics, as an example, that was built on Drupal, which is the largest digital event in the world. Billions of visitors, obviously the whole world watches the Olympics to some extent. So we're really good, I would say, Drupal, at performance and scalability. We have some advanced features like cache tags. I won't go into the details of that, but it's features that aren't typically available in most content management systems that allow us to scale bigger and better. We were also born in Belgium. Maybe a couple more quick things on the previous slide. Sorry. We
Sure.
were born in Belgium. You might not notice, but Belgium, we have two official languages. I'm from Belgium. That's why I'm talking about it this way, but Dutch and French. And so Drupal has always been very good at multilingual from day one. And today that manifests itself in many different ways. For example, the website for the European Commission is built in Drupal. Again, very large website. What's special about it is it's translated, I think, in 25 different languages, quite a few languages. We've been doing headless for a long time, actually long before it was called headless or decoupled. We added web service support to Drupal many, many years ago, and then kind of started talking about it as headless as well, because the rest of the world renamed it. But we've been doing a lot of these things for a long time. So I would also say it's not just about the features and all of the amazing capabilities that we have, but what's also very special about Drupal is that we have this community of people around the world contributing to Drupal um, every year. I would say over 10,000 or around 10,000 different people contribute to Drupal. Drupal 11, I think it was almost 2,000 people that have contributed to the release of Drupal 11, and about 600 or so, I think a little bit less than 600 organizations. I mean, these are amazing numbers. If you think about it, makes us one of the largest open source projects in the world. And very often these people are very passionate about Drupal. Their life has been improved because of Drupal, and so many amazing stories of people that got involved and were able to build a successful career on Drupal and also give back to Drupal in the process.
Awesome. I
That's
think
a little
that
bit about Drupal.
fantastic. And I think that's a big part of why we're here is that sense of community, that sense we can build things together, that sense that we all kind of collectively own the features that go into Drupal. And so speaking of those, we want to talk a little bit about some of the major updates that came in Drupal 11. So these are not everything that's included. You can certainly go check out the Drupal 11 release notes if you want to
We have,
see.
we have hundreds of improvements.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. There's a huge number of them, but there are a few things that we want to highlight. There is, and you'll see them as we go along here, and there's a few even that are not on the slide that we're going to take a quick look at. So I think what we'll start with, and I'll go ahead and kick off here, is there's an experimental navigation module that is part of the admin UI in Drupal 11 that you can enable if you'd like to check it out, that provides just a snappier, more responsive, more modern way to navigate the admin UI in Drupal. And it's something that is a little bit of a sneak preview of what a more general overhaul to the admin experience is going to look like and some of the longer term changes that are going to be made. But it's also something that you can use today to make it a little bit easier to find your way through that admin experience.
and,
Um,
yeah, and I would say it needs to be experienced, to be honest. Like a
yes.
screenshot doesn't quite do it justice. I mean, it looks beautiful, but like for me, the big difference was in like actually using the new experimental navigation and just the way it interacts and how it's kind of nice and snappy and that kind of stuff. So definitely
Yeah.
try that.
100% true. And I think you'll find that for a lot of these updates. We've got some visuals for you here on the slides, but a slide deck can't necessarily show the kind of usability improvements. And I would say a big focus in Drupal 11 and beyond, and especially when we start talking about Starshot, is taking a lot of those powerful things that Dries was talking about earlier that Drupal can do and that Drupal has grown into doing, and making them more and more accessible and easier to use for a wider audience of users. So,
And Tim,
uh,
there's a question maybe that maybe we can tackle, but the question is, why is it experimental? What does that mean?
oh yeah, maybe we should. Would you like to speak to that, or shall I?
I can, but basically, sometimes we call things experimental because we're not 100% sure if it works in all possible scenarios, in all different browsers, for all different users, maybe with disabilities. And so we keep things experimental to basically communicate that a feature isn't quite stable yet, and that you can use it at your own risk, so to speak. So if you enable it for, let's say, you have a Drupal site with thousands of people that have access to the admin UI, some users might experience, you know, glitches or bugs yet, and so we're still testing it and improving it if needed, and eventually we'll make it stable. And when we might make something stable, we feel usually very, very good about it. And so it should
Yeah,
be very safe to enable.
yeah. And typically it might be in the next minor version from that release. So not always, but oftentimes it'll just be another 6 months release cycle away from having that last element of polish to make it ready to
Yeah.
go and
And it,
enabled by default.
yeah, and sometimes experimental is, I would say, slightly misnomer. Like, so it could imply to some people it's full of bugs. Usually it means it's very high quality already, but we're just not 100% sure. So definitely try it out if you feel like it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we'll talk a little bit about some content authoring enhancements as well. And some of these are things that you might be originally familiar with from the contributed module ecosystem. And some of these are sort of totally new. But why don't we kick it off with workspaces?
Yeah, workspace is actually a feature that's been in the making for a long time, and also led to a lot of sort of architectural changes in Drupal as well. But essentially, it's a tool for content editors. And what it allows them to do is it allows them to create a new section on their sites and only make it go live when you want it to go live. And a section could be a single page, but a section could also be many pages with menu items and all kinds of things. And so you're basically able to create these sections and stage them between quotes, and then push them to production, to publish them from staging to production. You can even do things like create multiple variants of your website or multiple sections. So a use case for that could be an election scenario where you have two candidates. One of the candidates is going to be elected, let's say, as president, and you can create two versions or two different sections depending on which candidate wins, and literally hit published the second that the winner or elected president is announced. So it's a pretty cool capability. It's not necessarily for every site in the world, but if you have more advanced publishing needs and you want to do these kinds of things, it's pretty good. Another maybe quick use case could be you're a company, you have a product, you're thinking about a product launch, you can build out the entire product launch, maybe 10 pages about your new product, but you may also want to update your main page and other sections of your site. You can prepare all of that in a workspace so nobody can see it yet, and then only publish it when you're ready to announce your product. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. There's a great follow-up question about this in the chat as well, which is, what about some kind of workflow for approving when workspaces go live? And workflow is exactly the right word because there's another set of features in Drupal called workflows, which in fact allow you to define sort of publishing states. And you can use that sort of thing and who has permission to advance things between publishing states. So you can, in fact, use that to define sort of workflows together with workspaces and say, okay, when maybe someone who's a content editor has finished drafting the content, maybe it goes to an editor as a phase, and then a person with that role needs to approve it, or maybe it goes even to a legal review, and then that person needs to approve it. These are all, yeah, very basically content moderation type states. Um, exactly, Ariel. So um, another feature, and this is a small sort of sample, and this actually did come in 10.2 originally, I believe, but is something that we still want to make sure people are seeing and taking advantage of, is more descriptive field UI. And again, this is a small thing that's representative of a larger direction. So when you're building out content in Drupal or content types in Drupal especially, you're building a collection of fields that represent the sort of structured data of that content type. And we've relied a lot on people knowing the inside lingo of how Drupal works to understand what the fields are and how to use them, or to, tab over to some documentation page to figure this stuff out. So this change, again, relatively simple, but what it did was provide more inline, kind of easy to understand information about the fields that are configured on the site and how you can use them within your content types. Um, we have some more questions coming in about workspaces because I think people are excited about it. We're going to keep going for the moment, but could you please hold on to those questions, maybe drop them into the Q&A tab as well, and we'll keep going and be able to answer some of that for you shortly. So Dries, why don't you talk about this other kind of nerdy
Yeah,
feature, but it'll be great for any front enders out there.
that's right. It's for front-end developers. They're single directory components, or SDCs, as we say as well. It's essentially ability to create reusable components that you can use in your front end. An example might be, let's say you have an article, and at the bottom of the article, you want to put like a little bio about of the author, like a photo, name, that kind of stuff. You could make that a component, or a hero image could be a component. And the idea is that a component lives in a single directory, hence the name. And so everything is kind of contained or grouped, so as you can see in this kind of screenshot. And then it's reusable, it's easy to share these components and to reuse them across different modules or different use cases. And, single directory components on their own aren't gonna maybe revolutionize the world, but they're a foundational building block that you'll start using that in many more parts of Drupal. So it's a different way of sharing templates and reusable components, really. So it's pretty cool, I would say, and it will be a key building block in current initiatives like Experience Builder, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think if you want kind of a little bit of an analogy to understand, it's not exactly the same as this, but if you've used a sort of living style guide system, something like Storybook or some of the other tools like that, this is something that maps similarly to try and encapsulate a whole component, front-end component, in a single place, rather than, as you may have been used to in the past, having part of a template file here, having the twig here, having some JavaScript there, and kind of having to spaghetti out to find those pieces if you do want to reuse them or change them in a significant way. So um, let's keep hopping through. There's also some continuing with some of the sort of nerdy changes, but some very cool use cases, some security and compliance enhancements that came about. So one of them that I'd like to talk about is the access policy API, which is really, really very interesting. So Drupal's always been known for having an extremely robust and flexible and configurable permission system, where you can define any number of custom roles beyond the ones that appear by default, and define individual permissions that are assigned to those roles. And as anybody who's already used a Drupal site knows, you wind up with this incredible list of all the different combinations and permutations of roles and permissions that you might want to hand out. But there is now another extremely powerful layer, flexible layer, that allows you to do effectively context-sensitive permission assignment and revocation. So, for example, one of the things you could do is say you want to ensure that X or Y action literally cannot happen on a weekend. You could go ahead and actually define an access policy that says, hey, you can't publish things on Saturdays or Sundays without having to do any other, extra complicated logic with adding or removing roles or all these sorts of things. That's a little bit of an odd example, but you can imagine some other states where maybe, okay, you want to, maybe you do want to use that to freeze something during some kind of important event. I can imagine if you're one of the content and editorial team managing deployments of things to the Olympics during the Olympic event, you might want some extra
Mhm.
restrictions during that timeline, all sorts of things. Um, so it's a very, very powerful system. And it kind of hooks into a powerful, originally performance related feature of Drupal, the kind of cache context system to help understand um, what are the factors affecting whether or not you should allow or disallow certain permissions and roles. Um, Lots of good questions in here. We'll try and get to all of these. I'll skim back through the chat as we go. We're going to try and make sure we have enough time to continue, but we're doing good so far. Um, Dries, let's talk about recipes if we can.
Yeah, well, recipe is kind of a new concept that made its introduction in Drupal 11, and I personally think it's a big game changer for Drupal. Um, but essentially, a recipe is a Drupal term for a way for us to bundle a set of modules along with configuration and content, all of these things. And actually, if you go to the next slide, Tim, you can see some example
Yes.
recipes like the SEO recipe or the events recipes. These are recipes that we're currently building, but like an events recipe could essentially bundle a number of different modules. Like, so you get maybe a calendar view, so you get registration functionality, so you get maybe email notifications for registrants, these kinds of things. And you can basically, you'll be able to install a recipe, and then Drupal does all of the things for you that you would normally do by hand, such as figuring out which modules to use, installing them, configuring them as well, and often creating some sample content or default configuration as well. Or an SEO recipe is another great example. Like if you think about SEO, there's a list of best practices that people follow, right? Like you want clean URLs, you want meta tags, you want to have an XML sitemap. I mean, the list goes on. And now we can bundle all of these best practices and all of these modules, and we can combine them into a recipe so that as a user, you don't have to, figure out how to do these things and then how to configure them. And I love it personally because very often we have very often there's a lot of knowledge sort of in the heads of Drupal developers. Like some people have been building Drupal sites for, 15 years, and they've kind of developed all kinds of best practices. You tell them, hey, how do I improve SEO? They'll be like, do this, do that, do this, use this module, don't use that module. And so now we can kind of bottle up all that knowledge that's in people's heads, if you want, if you will, and put them in a recipe and make them reusable,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. And so we're adding recipe support. Well, we've added recipe support to Drupal core, and now it's going to find its way in things like Project Browser, Drupal.org, these
Yeah.
kinds of things.
And you can
And
think of this very much as the next generation of the distributions concept, without a lot of the baggage that came with distributions. Because oftentimes, for some folks who've used distributions before, you probably experienced a situation where you needed to wait for the distribution maintainer to update an individual piece within that distribution and sort of get ready to go. Whereas recipes, once they complete their installation of modules and configuration and all of those things, it's no different than if you had done it all manually. So you can take, after installing that recipe, you can then go on to continue to customize your site, make additional changes, use multiple recipes, which is a big difference from the way distributions worked, and do all of those things together. So
yeah, and Mandeep makes a comment that it looks a little bit like the App Store, and it's right. Like that's actually what we're actually doing. If we take just a step back for a minute, it's like we're actually building Project Browser, which is kind of like the App Store. It's just what you see on the right, where you can browse modules and recipes, and then you can install them with a single click. Then we're also working on automatic updates and these kinds of things. And all of a sudden, that combination of recipes plus Project Browser plus automatic updates plus some other things that we're doing, it's really going to change how people interact with Drupal and how people use Drupal. It's really going to make things much more accessible for many more people. So maybe the best part of recipes too, as Tim was explaining and alluding to, is that it's a lot easier to create recipes. You have to be a developer to create a recipe, I would say, but it's not as hard as creating a module or creating a distribution. And in fact, you kind of specify the recipe in a YAML file, like basically a text file. You can give it a name, a description, a type. You can tell it what modules to install, and then you can also apply some configuration. So this screenshot just gives you a very quick view of what that looks like. But yeah, I guess that is recipes.
Yeah, it's a really cool feature, and I can see a lot of excitement about it in the chat. To clarify, while this is effectively sort of the next generation direction for things like distributions, a lot of the major distributions in Drupal that exist out there, stuff like Commerce Kickstart and Opigno LMS and all sorts of other things, all of those are still functional. Nothing has, we haven't like deprecated the fundamental things that those need, but a lot of those maintainers are also converting their work to a recipe-based kind of workflow. So, okay, there's an amazing set of questions about all these features, and we're going to try and get to as many as we can. Again, please do try and put them in the Q&A tab. I will also try and go through back scroll to catch any that we miss. But before we get there, let's set a little bit of a vision for the future. So what are we setting up by creating recipes, having this vision of an app store-like project browser, talking about making some of these powerful things easier to use? Dries, will you talk us through the Starshot?
Sure. Yeah, so Drupal Starshot is something that I announced at DrupalCon Portland. It's like, what, 3 or 4 months ago? Maybe 4 months ago. And yeah, it's like an initiative that we have. It's a code name, Starshot, for an initiative that we have. I would say to really make Drupal easier to use, and specifically for non-developers, like maybe your typical marketer that's not a developer. And it combines a number of different initiatives, like smaller initiatives, like the ones you can see here on the screen, all the way from automatic updates and project browser, which we just touched upon, to experience builder, which is sort of the next version of layouts, layout builder, I would say, recipes that we mentioned, but also reimagining the trial experience of Drupal. And the way we're doing this is actually by introducing, between quotes, a new version of Drupal. And when I say new version, I don't mean a fork. It's not a fork of Drupal, but it's built on top of the existing Drupal core. But it's a version of Drupal that will specifically be easy out of the box. And as I mentioned, it will target the marketer persona. It will also target or sort of widen the addressable market of Drupal in the sense that it will be easier to, it will be good for maybe like smaller websites than the typical Drupal site. So in that sense, it allows us to go down market, between quotes, a little bit. And so you can actually see in the next image, like this is kind of a prototype of what Drupal.org could look like. And so you can see here is a download page, and you can see that we now have 2 versions. And by the way, this is just a prototype mockup, where on the left, you see Drupal CMS, which is actually going to be the product name for Drupal Starshot. So Starshot is just our initiative name, like I would say internal name, but because we do everything in the open, the concept of internal is maybe a bit odd, but it's our code name. But the public name, the name of the product, will be Drupal CMS. And what you can also see from the screenshot is that the box with Drupal CMS is actually bigger than the box that says Drupal core. And that we're actually recommending people that are new to Drupal, that have not used Drupal before, to start with Drupal CMS. So it's really meant to be a better starting point for new people to Drupal. And we're also not taking away Drupal core, which is a Drupal that you know and love, that will still be there. And we're still working on that. It's continues to get better and better on its own as well. But then Drupal CMS will basically be everything that's in Drupal core plus additional capabilities that we add to it. And we will stay in sync with Drupal core as well. So we're working on these sort of in harmony together. That's kind of the basic idea. So we fleshed all of that out in like a product strategy document, which I published or announced like a couple of weeks ago. I think I don't even know how long it is anymore, but it's like maybe 15 pages. So it's quite an extensive document. And it basically uses a product strategy framework calling Playing to Win to specify our winning aspiration, where will we play, which market are we going to address, which target, who's our target audience, what segments of the market do we want to go after. It also specifies how we will win. This is terminology from the framework, like what is our unique advantage compared to maybe Drupal core, but also compared to some of Drupal's competitors, and then what capabilities do we need to build in order to win. And so we specified all of that in this document, but the gist of it is, as I mentioned already, that we're going to prioritize content creators and marketers rather than just developers. And one of the design goals, as an example, is that they do not, like a user of Starshot or Drupal CMS will not have to use the command line or will not have to use an IDE. And that's why some of the things that you saw earlier, like recipes and project browser, are so important, right? Because they allow people to install modules and to configure things without having to do like composer install on the command line or something else. And then as I mentioned, we're also deliberately expanding our presence in the mid-market segment. And, we want to make it easier for people to maintain and build Drupal sites and be able to do that at a lower budget, effectively, with less resources. So a lot of the work that's going into Starshot right now is about sort of balancing ease of use with flexibility, including smart defaults will help a lot. Providing best practices will help a lot. We're also making, and that's where recipes come in, right? Bundling defaults and best practices. And then we've set out to design a set of recipes. We have a laundry list of recipes that we want to build. And they're essentially targeting common use cases for marketers, like common marketing tasks. An example would be configuring SEO on a site, and hence the SEO recipe. Another example would be we need a blog, we need a contact form. Like, these are very simple examples. More advanced examples could be, we have to comply to privacy regulation, and we don't know how we set up all the things you need so that you can make sure your website is compliant with GDPR and you can consent, all of these things. And that will be bundled as a best practice too in a recipe. So all of this is pretty exciting. So we have a strategy. We created a leadership team for Starshot, and then we created an advisory board. But then we also have broken down Starshot into smaller pieces, and we call them tracks. And you can see some of the tracks, but not all of the tracks on the screen. And then for each of the track, we have appointed like a track lead, and it could be an individual, multiple people, or a company, or a combination thereof. So we're now building each of these capabilities that you can see on the screen in parallel. So we have multiple teams working in parallel, bringing this sort of to market. And some of the things are pretty cool, I would say. Like, we're even experimenting with AI capabilities and how AI can be used for not just content creation related things, because that's where AI is used a lot, I would say, today. It's like, summarize this or translate this or write some text. We can do all of these things with Drupal, but now we're trying to push and actually use AI for site building tasks, whether it's creating content types or creating views. So pretty exciting work that's going on there. And yeah, we're trying to bring all of that together sort of in an easy to use package.
Yeah, and part of the reason I think we call all of this a star shot is because what we're doing is we're simultaneously taking a lot of the existing power. Like these are all things that technically you could do today in some form. There's some new stuff being developed for sure. But most of these things are all things that you could go find those contrib modules. You could do all this configuration. You could figure it out. But it takes a lot of expertise. And in a very open source way, knowing that we can come together and find a subject matter expert who can go to the community and say, what are all the needs for privacy management that most users will need in Drupal? Let's build a recipe for that. Let's configure smart defaults. Let's give everybody a jump start. And then, of course, you'll customize it from there as usual. It just gives us a new way to give everybody a strong landing point. And what's amazing about this is it doesn't restrict the flexibility and power of what you can do in Drupal core. So none of this work is at the expense of the developer persona who wants to go more advanced, who wants to do custom work and custom changes. It's all things that are additive and helps put that power in the hands of the regular content editor.
Yep, that's well said. And
So,
there's
oh,
many
please.
ways also to get involved. And Tim already in the chat typed the URL, d.o/starshot. So, if you want to get involved, if you want to learn more, that's a great page to go to.
Yeah, and getting involved can mean all sorts of things, right? You do not have to be a developer to get involved in this initiative. You can participate in just responding to polls from some of these track leads. They've already started asking questions of the community to get feedback. You can take a look at UI mockups. You can do all sorts of things. So yeah, Drupal.org/starshot has a lot of information about how to get involved. And I hope by presenting this sort of summary of what the Starshot initiative is, what it's trying to do to build this Drupal CMS version, you can kind of see what the trajectory of those new features coming into Drupal 11 is enabling and empowering, and how all of these things work together across both core development and the Starshot initiative.
And maybe one more thing, Tim, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
One of it just like there's a lot of excitement about Starshot. If you've not heard about it, you should definitely check it out. Like when I announced it on stage at DrupalCon Portland, I asked people to kind of raise their hands if they want to contribute to it. And I also asked them to pledge digitally so that people could scan a QR code from the audience or go to Drupal.org and basically sign up to help and contribute in many different ways, as Tim just explained. And we had over 550 people essentially pledge to start helping. And the reception has been amazing, I would say. And we've been doing a lot of different things. We've had dozen or so webinars even to enable people and to educate people on how to get involved and what it is. And all of that is available publicly as video recordings. And so if you're interested, by all means, go check it out and get involved.
Absolutely. And on that note, other ways to learn more and get involved would be to attend DrupalCon. And there's actually 3 DrupalCon events that I want to talk about on the upcoming calendar. So I want to start with DrupalCon Barcelona, which is coming up very shortly, the 24th to the 27th of September. There will be a whole track of Starshot related content. You will see kind of the latest progress and what's coming up as we move in this direction. And you'll also be able to find ways to contribute and participate. So I think that'll be really cool. The next event that'll be coming up this calendar year is DrupalCon Asia is back in the form of DrupalCon Singapore. From the 9th to 11th of December, if you are in that hemisphere or just want to go join that community, you can join DrupalCon Singapore. And again, that'll be even closer to the hopeful 1.0 release of the Starshot or Drupal CMS product. And so there'll be even more updates and excitement from there, building on everything that happens in Barcelona. And then finally, the last one that I want to promote is DrupalCon Atlanta. So in 2025, from the 24th to the 27th of March, we'll be in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. We encourage you to join us there as well. We will be celebrating everything that we've done with the sort of initial Starshot Drupal CMS release, and also probably talking about what comes up following that and the next steps to continue and grow and evolve what we're doing there. So DrupalCon is a program of the Drupal Association, a nonprofit program. So all the tickets from attendees and all the support we get from sponsors supports the Drupal Association, and which in turn supports these initiative leads and all these projects that we're doing and the infrastructure to host Drupal.org. So we really hope to see you there and encourage you to join us. With that, we can now go to Q&A, and I know we have tons of questions all over the place. And we have maybe 15, 20 minutes or so. So let me jump over and take a around at the Q&A. And as a note, yes, this whole presentation and the slides have been recorded, and you're certainly welcome to share that with other folks. So no worries on that front at all. Let me see if I can get to Q&A. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to go, we do have upvotes on some of these questions. So this was an early question at the beginning from Mandeep, which was, are the changes and features we highlighted for the Starshot initiative or for Drupal 11? The answer is all in that beginning of this presentation where we shared the recipes API, the access policy API, the new editorial features, the navigation. All of those things were in Drupal 11 and are available in Drupal 11. But of course, they'll also be used in Drupal CMS as part of the Starshot initiative. So all of those things are going to be there. Molly asks, what's the difference between staging an unpublished page versus using a workspace?
I can talk a little bit more about that if you want.
Yeah, please.
That'd be helpful. So a few things to unpack maybe, Molly, but a page usually in Drupal is a piece of content, and it's typically things like the body and the title. And so you can unpublish that piece of content, and the page that it's shown on will also disappear or be invisible. But it really stops there. With a workspace, you can actually work on multiple pieces of content, but also configuration changes, menu items, and other modifications. And you can set the visibility of these multiple pieces of content in a different way, in the sense that they apply to a workspace, which is, think of it as a separate environment almost. And something can be visible in a workspace to the people that only have access to the workspace, but not to the rest of the world, so to speak. And so a workspace allows you to collaborate with multiple people on a set of changes, a set of pages, and all of that can be unpublished to the world, but can be accessible to collaborators to work on.
Yeah.
And also, like, the way you publish things is very different. Like, you can publish an individual page, and that's great. But then if you need to make another change somewhere, because maybe you want to link to that page from other pages, then you have to go make those edits individually, which is most of the time, that's fine. But with a workspace, you can create a new page, but you can also go and update links to that page, and you can group all of these changes into one thing that you can publish with one click, so to speak. So that's a little bit the difference between a single page and workspaces. And with that are also the unpublished, published. I mean, it changes, because of that. I know it's kind of hard to explain well, I realize.
You sort of think of it as a configurable set of almost copies of your site or copies of sections of your site that you can kind of work on until they're completely ready, leaving the original versions still published so they don't have to disappear while you're making the changes, and then publishing them all at once. So a related question, Dries, is does Layout Builder work in conjunction with Workspaces? And I think let's add to that, will the new Experience Builder work in conjunction with Workspaces?
Yeah, it should. Definitely, the answer is yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, everything is built so that it all works together.
Yeah.
obviously. So
Daniel asks a good question about the new admin toolbar. So will that become standard when it's out of experimental, or will we have a choice to sort of switch between the horizontal and the new sort of vertical one?
mm,
Um, I'll comment on that, that usually when a stable feature like that that's replacing a major UI element comes into play, it does in fact replace it once it's stable, once we're sure that that all of the features are fully compatible, and that sort of a thing. That's typically the case. Now, it may still have by the time it goes stable, it may also have a horizontal display mode, et cetera, et cetera. Or there will likely still be contributed modules that if you prefer that style, that you could use one of those as well. So
yeah, that's right. It usually becomes a new default, and then the old becomes a contributed module.
yeah.
So if you want to keep using it, you'll be able to, but we're going to try and encourage most people to switch.
Um, So now we get into, let's see, we got a couple Starshot questions here. First one, I'm going to go in order of upvotes here. You're recommending Drupal CMS as the beginners or the starting point, but would it also be a good starting point even for experienced developers?
I think it could be for sure. Because I think the recipes are built by experienced developers and contributors, and so it can save expert Drupal users a lot of time if you just want to use these recipes. Now, you don't have to. You'll be able to install a recipe on top of Drupal core as well. So, um, I think it's good for everyone, potentially good for everyone. But if you're a developer and you prefer to use the command line or you have very specific best practices that you follow, you may want to use Drupal core. I think it will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah,
We don't have Drupal Starshot yet. We're still building it, so it's not even in alpha or in beta,
yeah,
because we've only been working on it for like 4 months, or not even 4 months, I think. And so it's a little bit too early to tell what will happen, but I could definitely imagine a future where even experienced developers use Drupal Starshot.
awesome. I'm going to stick with a couple of the Starshot questions while we're on the topic. So should someone think of Starshot as being like a WordPress.com versus a WordPress.org, or is that not quite the right way to think about it?
I don't think it's quite the way to think about it. So because both Drupal core and Drupal Starshot or Drupal CMS are downloadable versions of Drupal. So you can download a zip file, or you can do a git checkout. And WordPress.com is a hosted version of WordPress. It's WordPress as a service delivered as a SaaS, and Starshot isn't that. It's still a do it yourself, host it yourself, kind of open source product. Now, there will definitely be hosting providers that offer hosted versions of it, and they can host it for you. Um, so it's different in that sense. It is more like WordPress in the sense that it goes more after the same user, I would say. Like I would say Drupal core is probably more for developers, more technical people. And WordPress, I think historically has been, like targeting maybe less technical people and more marketers. And Starshot is definitely closing that gap, or is hoping to close that gap. And so I would say that people that use WordPress might be more interested in Drupal Starshot than they might have been interested in Drupal core. And people that might have been, I don't know, intimidated is probably not the right word, but that may people that may feel like, wow, Drupal core, it's a bit over my head because it's maybe a little bit too complex or technical. Those people should definitely take a look at Drupal Starshots, because we're really trying to go after those people. So in that sense, it is more like WordPress, but it's not a hosted version of Drupal core.
So here's a couple questions about single directory components.
Mhm.
One is, will the JavaScript and CSS be automatically registered, or are libraries still needed? And what will the workflow be like? This is where both Dries and I will have to say we're not front-end developers ourselves and maybe
Yeah,
not super good
I'm
at
not.
answering them. But I do know that there is some more information on the core documentation page for single directory components that does include automatic registration of things added to the directories, which I believe includes both the JavaScript and the CSS. So I actually think the answer to the first part of your question is yes. Um,
Yep. But yeah, I'm not a front-end developer, so
yeah,
I
as
haven't
the
actually tried. I'll admit it on Zoom. I've not tried building an SDC myself. I'm eager to. But
yeah,
yeah, if you look at my blog, you can tell like I'm not a front-end developer.
there's some SDC work
Yeah.
going on in Drupal.org's redesign at the
Mhm.
moment. It's going to be cool to see that. So, um, a related question, if single directory components sort of move us in a storybook direction, why not have something like Storybook in core? That's a good question. There might be a recipe for that. Maybe at some point it will be decided that should be a standard part of something like Drupal CMS. Certainly for regular, original Drupal core, I think Drupal core tries not to be too opinionated about what direction or what specific tool someone might want to use. So I think that's why it's not the case right now. But we'll see what happens with recipes. It may become something that's only a click away once we have a recipe browser. Um,
There's a question about having to upgrade from Drupal 10 to 11. I
yes.
can talk a little bit about this. It's a question from Tom Pierce. And he specifically asked, should we be looking to upgrade from Drupal 10 to Drupal 11? And you can certainly upgrade. I've already upgraded my sites. But one thing that we decided is that um, we will basically keep supporting Drupal 10 until the release of Drupal 12. And you might know, but we do a major release every 2 years. So what that means is that Drupal 10 should be supported until sort of the second half, I would say, of 2026, if I got my dates right. So that means you don't immediately have to upgrade from Drupal 10 to 11, because if you're on Drupal 10, you're on you'll be supported for some time, basically until mid to late 2026,
There's a
which is great.
related,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really awesome. It gives people a bigger time horizon. That means that the full supported period for Drupal 10, if we go back to Drupal 10's release, becomes something like 4 years, I think.
Mhm.
So um, hopefully that'll be a big help to folks. I would say still think about it. Try not to put it off till the last minute, but it would be
Yeah.
a great thing to do. There was a comment on
And
this
also
question.
because, well, maybe one thing that's worth adding, Tim, is like Drupal 10 will sort of be in maintenance mode.
Yes,
What that means is like we will fix bugs and security things, but we will not backport, all the improvements or all of the new features. And so like you can stay on Drupal 10, but then you also have to accept that it will be a stable release, meaning we'll fix bugs, etc. But you may not get some of the latest and greatest features. Some things, a limited set of things will be backported essentially.
awesome. This secondary question was, will auto updates support the upgrade process from 10 to 11? I have to say, right now, auto updates is focused on patch level releases. So making sure security releases and bug fix releases can be automatically applied. And they're certainly looking at support for things like minor releases, and that might help you along a little bit. But at least in the near term, automatic updates is not going to be able to do a full, or most likely not going to be able to do a full major release upgrade. We'll see what happens in the next course of the next 2 years, but it'll help you in the sense that it can help you keep on top of the patch releases and the security releases, and then hopefully soon some of the minor releases as well. But it may not be enough for the majors. So um, let's see, we've got maybe 5 minutes here. A great question is this concept of the experience builder, which was you
Mhm.
referred to, Dries, as kind of the next generation of page building. Does
Mhm.
that replace layout builder, add on to it?
Yeah,
Um,
it will eventually replace Layout Builder is a short version. Um, and so essentially what happened is we introduced Layout Builder in 2018, I think. So it's been quite some time. And it's been a success. I think a lot of people use Layout Builder. But despite that success, there's also a lot of learnings. Um, and one way that manifests itself as an example is there's a lot of like sort of community developed modules that improve Layout Builder. And really what that told us is like, all right, we have to keep investing in Layout Builder, right? And we need to bring some of these community developed modules into core because so many people use them. And that essentially led to us thinking about doing sort of a second wave of work on Layout Builder. And I actually originally announced that as the next generation page builder initiative. But then we decided to actually be more ambitious than that based on feedback. And like we've been shopping that idea around and we've been talking to people about what could be in that sort of next generation version of Layout Builder or Page Builder. And we essentially decided to broaden our focus and be more ambitious and even include things like basic theming capabilities and basic styling capabilities. And so all of that essentially merged into this notion of experience builder, which incorporates some of these more ambitious goals. And so one of the things we also hope to do is to not just evolve Layout Builder, but also kind of this idea of like taking the best ideas from Layout Builder, but also adopting the best ideas from paragraphs as an example, which is often an alternative way of doing things in Drupal. And um, the reason we're trying to do that is because if you think about it, sometimes it's good that there's two competing solutions, paragraphs and Layout Builder, but really it would be better if we had one way of doing things that would be unifying, so to speak, and that we can then all contribute to together instead of building two separate approaches. So long story short is that yes, it will replace Layout Builder, but it might also potentially replace paragraphs or big parts of paragraphs with the goal to bring the different approaches together in a single way of doing things in Drupal. And we think that reducing fragmentation that way is good because it will accelerate innovation in that way. And that will help us stay at the forefront of site building. So
a good question. Um, there's a lot of other great questions here, including several important ones about recipes. Like, for example, I'm going to lightning round this real quick and then answer a separate question. So, um, one question was, is Drupal CMS a recipe itself? Drupal CMS is among other things, it's a collection of recipes. So there's several different individual recipes within it. And one of the interesting things about recipes is recipes can install other recipes. So sometimes they can be nested in a certain sort of way. And so there's that using a combination of recipes and other things that are going into building what Drupal CMS is. And that relates to this other quick question, which is, can you turn off a recipe if it's not doing what you want? A recipe does a set of installation and configuration at the beginning. It's not in itself like a module or or some kind of like scripted process, really. It's something where, okay, it installed a couple modules. If you don't like those, you can disable them. You can remove the content type that it added and things like that. You don't get locked in, but it isn't necessarily going to have a one-click clean up everything that was there button. So just something to note. Um, and the last really quick thing before I'll pitch a final answer or a final question to Dries, which is just, will recipes lead to a favored contrib module ecosystem where ones that are in a featured recipe wind up with more support and ones that aren't maybe die off or lose contributors? I think the answer is probably to a certain degree, yes, and probably that's a good thing. As you know, right now, sometimes there's 3 or 4 ways to do things, and a site builder without experience of each of those modules might wind up with one that isn't the best way to go. And it may be a good thing that we start to see some focus on holistic solutions where these recipes and the modules in them work together really well. And that might mean there's a little bit of consolidation. But I also expect that there will still be people promoting alternatives, and as people find them useful, those will win. So, all right. So I'm afraid we're pretty much going to have to wrap up here. The very last question is, what's the state of readiness for Drupal 11 in the sort of module ecosystem? So Dries, I know you don't have the numbers in front of you, but would you speak to that a little bit from what you know, from what Gabor on your team has been updating in the community?
Sorry, yes, I do not have the numbers in front of me, but I do know that we continue to make a lot of progress on sort of readiness out of the gate, if you will. And like we're more ready than with 11 than we were with Drupal 10, and we're more ready with than we were like before that as well. So I think we've gotten much better at managing API changes and working with deprecations and encouraging the community to upgrade their modules, etc., etc. Some of that through automation, some of that through better policies and best practices. And so if you're unsure if you are able to upgrade, there's some tooling that will help you assess that. An upgrade status module comes to mind, but there's a couple of other things you can use as well. And you can install it on your Drupal site, and it will tell you which modules have Drupal 11 compatible releases and which modules don't. In many cases, getting a module upgraded to Drupal 11 is very little effort. And sometimes it's the maintainer just been too busy doing other things in life. And often there's opportunities for quick contribution. And that could actually sort of enable many sites to upgrade. So check out that module, I would say. If you find something that's not ready, if you are a developer, don't be afraid to take a quick look. Sometimes it's as simple as changing one line of code and the module is ready to be upgraded.
Yeah. So yeah, that upgrade status module, there's also a Drupal 11 or D11 readiness channel in the Drupal community Slack where you can ask questions or participate in contribution. And there are, I think, thousands of modules that are ready already, but of course the Drupal ecosystem has more than 40,000 modules total. So where we are and which ones you're using it will be an interesting question. But yeah, there's definitely more information for that to be found on Drupal.org and in the community Slack workspaces. So with that, we are over time. We never get to all of the questions that we want to. There's an appendix of additional information about Drupal 11 as part of this presentation. So you'll receive that with the slides and with the recording of this. We will see if the chat transcript and the Q&A transcript can also be shared. I'll ask the webinar support folks if they can do that for us. And you'll get that information by email if you're registered. And yes, you're welcome to share this information with others. With that, I just want to say thank you to Dries for joining me for this conversation.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. We hope to see you at DrupalCon, and I hope you'll consider a Drupal Association membership to support our nonprofit efforts. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending.
All right.
See you in the Drupal world.